The morning fog rolled across the naval base like a thick blanket, muting the sounds of boots marching in formation and helicopters warming up on distant pads. Naval Special Warfare Command at Virginia Beach stood as a monument to American military power, its concrete buildings housing the most elite warriors the nation had ever produced. Behind its secured gates, classified operations were planned that would never make headlines, but would shape the course of history nonetheless. Colonel James Sullivan stood at the window of Training Room Alpha, watching young SEAL candidates running drills on the beach. At 64, his weathered face bore the marks of countless missions across 3 decades of service. The silver in his close-cropped hair had fully replaced what was once midnight black, but his posture remained ramrod straight, a testament to decades of discipline. He turned back to the room where 20 senior SEAL officers sat attentively absorbing his lecture on advanced infiltration techniques. Gentlemen, the difference between success and failure often comes down to the 60 seconds before first contact. Sullivan's voice carried the weight of experience. In Baghdad, in 2004, my team had exactly 52 seconds to. The secure phone in his pocket vibrated. Only 3 people had that number. Sullivan paused mid-sentence, noting the flicker of surprise on the faces of his students. In 15 years of instruction, he had never interrupted a lecture. Continue reviewing the Operation Sandstorm file. I'll return shortly. Sullivan stepped into the hallway, checking the caller ID. Pentagon secure line. He pressed the phone to his ear. Sullivan. The voice on the other end spoke for less than 30 seconds. Sullivan's expression remained unchanged, but his knuckles whitened around the phone. Understood. Briefing room for 30 minutes. He ended the call and stood motionless for a moment. The Pentagon had activated Emergency Protocol Sierra Echo 7 authorization directly from the Secretary of Defense. Whatever was happening, it went beyond standard operational parameters. 23 minutes later, Sullivan sat at the head of a polished oak table in Briefing Room 4, the most secure location on base. The room was swept for electronic surveillance devices hourly. The walls contained copper mesh to block any signals. No recording devices were permitted. Whatever was discussed in this room stayed in this room. 5 men entered, each one a hand-selected SEAL team leader with multiple combat deployments. Lieutenant Jason Maxwell, tall and broad-shouldered, with a reputation for weapons expertise and cool under fire. Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, the electronics genius who could hack systems most technicians didn't even understand existed. Senior Sergeant Marcus Thompson, communications specialist fluent in 6 languages. Sergeant Michael Wilson, demolitions expert, whose understanding of explosive materials bordered on artistic. And Staff Sergeant Daniel Jackson, infiltration specialist, who moved through security systems like a ghost. Sullivan nodded to each man as they took their seats. No pleasantries, no small talk. The atmosphere in the room crackled with tension. Gentlemen, as of 0900 hours this morning, we are operating under Sierra Echo 7 protocols. That means this conversation never happened, this mission does not exist, and your involvement will never be acknowledged. Sullivan's eyes moved from face to face, gauging their reactions. Captain Reynolds, please secure the room. The base security officer nodded and engaged the electronic locks. A subtle hum indicated that the signal jammers had activated. The light above the door turned from green to red. 30 minutes ago, I received direct orders from the Secretary of Defense. We are being tasked with a mission of the highest national security priority. An asset will be arriving momentarily to brief us on the specifics. Maxwell leaned forward. What kind of asset, sir? Sullivan's face revealed nothing. The kind that doesn't exist on paper, Lieutenant. The tension in the room thickened. These men had operated at the highest levels of classified warfare, yet even they rarely encountered truly black operations the government would deny all knowledge of. Sir, Rodriguez ventured, are we talking CIA? Sullivan shook his head. Higher clearance. The individual arriving has authorization that supersedes even JSOC command structure. The men exchanged glances. They had all heard rumors of operatives who functioned outside traditional command structures, ghosts who answered only to the highest echelons of power. Few believed such operatives actually existed. A soft electronic tone indicated someone at the door. Captain Reynolds checked the security monitor, then looked to Sullivan with a raised eyebrow. Sullivan nodded once and Reynolds unlocked the door. The figure that stepped into the room defied expectations. She stood perhaps 5 feet 6 inches, with an athletic build evident even under her unmarked tactical gear. Dark hair pulled back in a practical braid revealed a face that could have belonged to a college professor or corporate executive rather than a covert operative. She carried a weathered rifle case in one hand and a biometric security case in the other. No insignia, no rank indicators, no name tape. Nothing to identify her affiliation with any branch of the military or intelligence services. What happened next would become legend within the classified corridors of naval special warfare. Maxwell stood first. His chair scraped against the floor as he snapped to attention with military precision that would impress a drill instructor. Within 2 seconds, every man in the room was standing rigidly at attention, including Sullivan himself. None had been ordered to do so. None could have explained precisely why they did it. Something in the woman's bearing and the quiet authority she projected had triggered an instinctive response in men who had faced death without flinching. She stopped in the center of the room, placing her rifle case on the table with careful precision. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in each face with an evaluative gaze that seemed to peer straight through their carefully maintained facades. "At ease, gentlemen." Her voice was quiet, yet carried effortlessly the kind of voice accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "My name is Morgan Hayes. The details of my service record are not accessible to anyone in this room. If you attempt to research me after this meeting, you will find nothing. No personnel file, no deployment history, no official acknowledgement of my existence." She placed her palm on the biometric security case. It hissed open, revealing a digital tablet and several folded documents bearing red border markings. Sullivan recognized them immediately. Red-eye classification documents, the highest level of security clearance in the United States military. "As of this moment, you are all operating under red-eye protocol. The information I am about to share does not leave this room. You will not discuss it with your commanding officers, your teammates, or anyone else regardless of their security clearance." Hayes made eye contact with each man. "Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am," came the unanimous response. Hayes connected her tablet to the room's secure projection system. The lights dimmed automatically as the wall screen illuminated, displaying satellite imagery of what appeared to be a research facility built into the side of a mountain. 3 days ago, a highly classified weapons system was stolen from a DARPA research facility in New Mexico. The technology, codenamed Project Thanatos, represents the most significant advancement in covert warfare capabilities since the development of stealth technology. She tapped her tablet, and the image changed to show schematics of what looked like mechanical insects no larger than a housefly. Project Thanatos consists of autonomous microdrones with advanced artificial intelligence. Each unit is approximately 15 millimeters in size, constructed of experimental nanocarbon components and virtually undetectable by current security systems. Hayes zoomed in on the detailed schematics. These units can infiltrate secure facilities through ventilation systems, structural gaps, or even open windows. Once inside, they can deliver a lethal dose of a proprietary neurotoxin that metabolizes within seconds, leaving no trace in the victim's system. Death appears to be from natural causes, specifically resembling a sudden cardiac event. Sullivan leaned forward, studying the schematics. "Assassination technology." Hayes nodded once. "That's one application. But Thanatos has broader capabilities. The units can also deliver surveillance packages, penetrate electronic systems through direct physical contact, or deploy specialized EMP charges capable of disabling localized electronic equipment." "How many units are we talking about?" Wilson asked, his demolitions expertise making him particularly sensitive to the destructive potential. "A production run of 200 units was completed last month. The entire inventory was stolen along with the programming, architecture, and manufacturing specifications." Hayes paused, letting the implications sink in. "If this technology reaches the open market, we're looking at a fundamental shift in the balance of power. Any organization with sufficient resources could conduct untraceable assassinations of world leaders, disable critical infrastructure, or penetrate our most secure facilities." Maxwell whistled low under his breath. "Who has the capability to breach a DARPA black site?" Hayes pressed a button on her tablet. The screen displayed a photograph of a tall man with cold eyes and a distinctive scar running from his left temple to his jawline. "Thomas Blackwood, former Delta Force operator, disavowed after selling classified information to private military contractors in 2005. Since then, he's operated as a mercenary specializing in high-risk asset acquisition for various non-state actors. Sullivan's eyes narrowed as he studied the photograph. Blackwood, I've heard that name. You should have. Hayes's tone grew noticeably colder. He was part of Operation Desert Storm under your command colonel, 16th Tactical Unit. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Sullivan. He stared at the photograph, recognition dawning in his eyes. He was reported killed in action during the advance into Kuwait. Body never recovered. He wasn't killed. Hayes's voice contained the first hint of emotion, a controlled anger simmering beneath her professional demeanor. He deserted during a critical mission, leaving his unit exposed. 5 American soldiers died as a result. Rodriguez glanced between Hayes and Sullivan. You seem to know a lot about this mission, ma'am. Hayes held Sullivan's gaze for a long moment before turning to Rodriguez. I was there. The revelation landed like a physical force in the room. If Hayes had been present during Desert Storm operations, she had to be older than she appeared, and her involvement in classified operations extended back decades. Blackwood and I served together in a specialized unit called Ghost Protocol, a joint CIA and military intelligence operation during the Gulf War. Our missions never appeared in any official record. The unit itself was disavowed after the war. Hayes brought up new satellite imagery. 3 days ago, Blackwood led a team of 12 mercenaries into the DARPA facility. They neutralized the security systems, eliminated 16 guards, and extracted the entire Thanatos project without triggering any external alarms. Thompson frowned. How do we know it was Blackwood if he's so careful about leaving evidence? In response, Hayes played security footage, showing a tall man directing a tactical operation with military precision. Despite the poor quality in his attempt to conceal his face, the scar was visible when he turned toward the camera. He wanted us to know it was him. Hayes paused the video on a frame where Blackwood seemed to look directly into the camera. This was a message as much as it was a theft. Sullivan leaned back in his chair. Where's the technology now? Based on intelligence gathered over the past 72 hours, we believe Blackwood has transported the Thanatos project to a secure facility codenamed Angel Fortress. Hayes brought up a topographical map of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. It's a decommissioned NSA listening post that was officially closed in 2011 following the Cold War downsizing. Unofficially, it remained operational as a black site until 2015. A domestic target, Jackson noted. That complicates things. Posse comitatus restrictions don't apply to this mission, Hayes interrupted. As I said at the beginning, this operation does not exist. You will be operating without official sanction, without backup, and without acknowledgement if captured or killed. She zoomed in on the mountain facility. Angel Fortress was designed to withstand a direct nuclear strike. 3 feet of reinforced concrete surrounding a steel and titanium internal structure. Air filtration systems capable of operating in a contaminated environment for up to 3 years. Independent power generation and water purification. And security systems that would make Fort Knox look like a convenience store. And we're supposed to break into this fortress, recover a weapon system we can barely comprehend, and extract without anyone knowing we were there. Maxwell's tone conveyed his skepticism. Hayes turned to him. No, Lieutenant. We need to reach Angel Fortress before Blackwood can transfer the Thanatos technology to his buyers. Buyers, Thompson asked. You mean he hasn't delivered it yet? Blackwood is a businessman, not an ideologue, Hayes explained. He's arranged an auction to be held 72 hours from now. Participants include representatives from North Korean intelligence, a Middle Eastern terrorist organization, and at least 2 private military corporations with ties to hostile foreign governments. She displayed a countdown timer on the screen, 68, 14, 37, and counting. Once that technology leaves U.S. soil, we may never recover it. The fallout would reshape global politics and warfare for decades to come. So we hit this place before the auction, Sullivan summarized. Extract the technology, neutralize Blackwood and his team, and disappear. Hayes nodded. That's the mission. With all due respect, ma'am, Maxwell said, studying the fortress schematics, this looks like a job for a much larger force, maybe even Rangers or Delta. A larger force would be detected, Hayes replied. Angel Fortress has seismic sensors that can detect the movement of a squad larger than 8 people. It has thermal imaging that can identify human heat signatures through forest canopy. And it has autonomous defense drones programmed to respond to any unidentified aircraft within a 10-mile radius. She looked around the room. This mission requires a small team with specialized skills operating with perfect coordination and complete deniability. And why you? Jackson asked bluntly. No disrespect intended, but what makes you the expert on this facility? The room tensed at the directness of the question. Hayes, however, seemed unperturbed. A fair question, Sergeant. She tapped her tablet again. The screen changed to display an internal schematic of Angel Fortress. 3 years ago, I infiltrated this facility alone to extract intelligence on a domestic surveillance program that had exceeded its legal authorization. I spent 72 hours inside mapping security systems, patrol patterns, and structural vulnerabilities that don't appear on any official blueprint. Maxwell let out a low whistle. You penetrated that fortress by yourself. I did. There was no pride in her voice, just statement of fact. And I can guide your team through the same access points I used. More importantly, I know exactly where Blackwood would store the Thanatos technology within the facility. You sound very certain about Blackwood's methods, Thompson observed. Hayes's expression hardened. I trained with him for 4 years. I know how he thinks, how he plans, how he executes operations. And he knows the same about me. That's what makes this mission particularly dangerous. We're not just facing a fortified position with advanced security, we're facing an adversary who can anticipate many of our tactical approaches. A young SEAL lieutenant at the far end of the table raised his hand hesitantly. Ma'am, you mentioned being in Desert Storm and infiltrating this fortress 3 years ago. Your operational history seems extensive. Hayes regarded him steadily. You're wondering about my qualifications, about whether I can keep up with a SEAL team in the field. The lieutenant nodded uncomfortably. Sullivan cleared his throat. Lieutenant Evans, allow me to shed some light on that question. All eyes turned to the colonel. During Operation Desert Storm, my SEAL team was pinned down by Republican Guard forces outside Kuwait City. We had wounded men, dwindling ammunition, and no extraction plan. The official record states that an airstrike provided cover for our escape. He looked at Hayes with newfound recognition. That's not what happened, is it? No, Colonel, it isn't. Hayes's voice remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Sullivan turned to his men. A single sniper eliminated 14 enemy combatants in under 11 minutes. Shots were taken from a distance of over 1,200 meters in swirling sand conditions, with winds gusting to 30 knots. I've never seen marksmanship like that before or since. The sniper created a corridor for our extraction, then disappeared. We never learned their identity. Hayes said nothing, but the silence itself was confirmation. That was you, Evans said, awe creeping into his voice. I was 21 years old and had been operating in theater for 16 months. Hayes replied quietly. I was doing my job, nothing more. Sullivan studied her with new eyes. You weren't regular military. No standard unit could have been deployed in that area at that time. As I said, Colonel, my service record doesn't exist in any database you can access. Hayes redirected attention to the mission. What matters now is stopping Blackwood before the auction. The room fell silent as the SEALs processed this information. They had all heard legends of shadow operators whose missions remained classified decades after completion. Few believed such stories were anything more than military urban legends. Yet here stood living proof. My father, Hayes said unexpectedly, drawing everyone's attention, was Colonel William Hayes, one of the original members of SEAL Team 2. He died during a classified operation in 1982 when I was 12 years old. The mention of William Hayes sent a visible shock through Sullivan. Bill Hayes, I served under him in my first deployment. They told us he died in a training accident. That was the official story, Hayes replied, a hint of bitterness in her tone. The truth was classified beyond top secret. His body was never recovered. She clicked open her rifle case. Inside lay a customized M40A6 sniper rifle with modifications that made the SEALs lean forward with professional interest. The scope alone represented technology most of them had only heard rumors about, a Schmidt and Bender PM225-2556 with integrated rangefinder and atmospheric sensors. This was his, modified and updated, but the heart of it remains the same rifle he carried. Her fingers traced the worn stock briefly, a rare moment of sentimentality. When I turned 18, I was approached by a government agency that doesn't officially exist. They offered me a chance to follow in my father's footsteps to serve my country in ways that would never be acknowledged publicly. Hayes closed the case. I've spent the past 22 years operating in the shadows. The missions I've completed, the operations I've led, they don't appear in any record. The people I've saved and those I've killed exist only in my memory. She looked around the table. I'm telling you this not to impress you, but so you understand what we're facing. Blackwood was trained in the same program. He has the same skills, the same invisible operational history and access to resources that would shock you. The difference is he's now using those skills for the highest bidder. Sullivan nodded slowly. What's the plan, Hayes? She activated a holographic display showing a three-dimensional model of Angel Fortress. We insert via halo jump at 200 hours tomorrow morning. The fortress has a blind spot in its aerial surveillance on the northeastern ridge during the scheduled satellite pass. Our window is exactly 90 seconds. The display zoomed in on a ventilation shaft. We access the facility through this emergency ventilation system. It's too small for most operators, but I've traversed it before. Once inside, I'll disable the primary security node while your team secures our exit route. She highlighted different sections of the fortress. Blackwood will almost certainly store the Thanatos technology in the Level 4 secure vault. That's where we'll encounter the heaviest resistance. Based on intelligence, he has at least 8 mercenaries on site, all with special forces backgrounds from various countries. Rodriguez studied the security systems. Those are military-grade encryptions. I'll need time to bypass them. That's where I come in, Hayes said. I've memorized the bypass codes from my previous infiltration. They change monthly but follow a predictable, algorithmic pattern. The briefing continued for another hour as Hayes detailed every aspect of the facility's security systems, patrol patterns, and structural weaknesses. Her knowledge was comprehensive down to which door hinges squeaked and which security cameras had blind spots. Maxwell, initially skeptical, found his doubts fading as Hayes demonstrated an intimate understanding of tactical operations that could only come from extensive field experience. One more thing, Hayes said as the briefing concluded. This mission has a secondary objective that's equally important. Thomas Blackwood cannot be allowed to escape again. He possesses knowledge that represents a continuing threat to national security. You want us to terminate him? Jackson asked directly. I want him brought to justice, Hayes clarified. But if that's not possible, then yes, termination is authorized and required. Sullivan stood up. I'll lead this operation personally. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Colonel, with all due respect, field operations aren't typically led by someone at your command level. This isn't a typical operation. Sullivan's voice carried the weight of decision. And Blackwood operated under my command. That makes this my responsibility. Hayes studied him for a moment, then nodded. Very well, Colonel. Your experience will be valuable. As the team prepared to disperse to gather equipment and make personal preparations, Maxwell approached Hayes. Ma'am, I couldn't help noticing you seem to have a personal history with Blackwood that goes beyond professional rivalry. Hayes paused in packing her tablet. For a moment it seemed she might not answer. Blackwood was my partner for 3 years. We operated in 27 countries together, completed 19 high-priority missions. I trusted him with my life countless times. Her eyes hardened. During our final mission in Iraq, Blackwood sold our position to Iraqi intelligence for $2 million. 5 members of our team were killed in the ambush. I was captured and spent 2 months in an interrogation facility before I escaped. She closed her case with a decisive click. So, yes, Lieutenant, you could say there's history between us. Maxwell nodded slowly. Understood, ma'am. As the SEALs filed out to prepare, Sullivan remained behind with Hayes. Morgan, he said quietly, using her first name once they were alone, there's something you're not telling the team. She met his gaze without flinching. There's a lot I'm not telling them, James. Operational security requires it. This isn't about the mission. Sullivan stepped closer. This is about your father, about what really happened in 1982. Hayes went very still. What do you know about that? Enough to understand why this mission is personal for you. Sullivan's voice dropped lower. Bill Hayes didn't die in a training accident, and he wasn't killed in standard combat operations either. This isn't the time, Colonel. If we're going into Angel Fortress facing Blackwood and whatever he's planned, I need to know what we're really walking into. Sullivan's expression was grave. Your father discovered something within the intelligence community, didn't he? Something he wasn't supposed to know. Hayes stared at him for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. How long have you known? I've suspected for years. Bill was my mentor. Before his last mission, he shared concerns about certain operations that exceeded legal authorization. 2 weeks later, he was dead, and everyone who asked questions about it found themselves reassigned or forcibly retired. He watched her carefully. Blackwood was connected to your father's death somehow, wasn't he? Hayes glanced toward the door to ensure they were truly alone, then nodded once. Blackwood was the shooter. He was a young operative then, proving his loyalty to the program. My father had discovered evidence of illegal operations conducted by a rogue element within the intelligence community. Operations involving experimental weapons tested on unwitting subjects. He was preparing to take his evidence to the Inspector General. And they silenced him. They tried to erase him completely. Hayes's voice contained decades of controlled rage. They didn't just kill him. They erased his real service record, buried his discoveries, and threatened my mother into silence. Sullivan absorbed this with a grim expression. And now Blackwood has stolen a weapon that could continue that legacy of deniable operations. Exactly. Hayes met his eyes. This isn't just about national security, James. It's about preventing history from repeating itself. About ensuring weapons like Thanatos can't be used to eliminate anyone who asks inconvenient questions. Sullivan nodded slowly. The team doesn't need to know this part. No, they don't. They need to focus on the mission parameters. Hayes checked her watch. We deploy in 14 hours. Get your men ready, Colonel. As Sullivan turned to leave, Hayes called after him. James, one more thing. He paused at the door. If anything happens to me during this operation, there's a secure file with my attorney. It contains everything my father discovered, everything I've learned since, and evidence linking Blackwood to at least 11 assassinations disguised as accidents or natural causes. Sullivan understood the implication. If Hayes died on this mission, her dead man's switch would expose decades of classified operations. I'll make sure that file stays sealed, Morgan. She nodded once. Then let's go catch a ghost. For the next several hours, the team prepared in intense silence. Equipment was checked and rechecked. Weapons were clean loaded and tested at the base's underground range. Communication systems were encrypted with protocols that would reset every 30 minutes. Hayes moved among them, observing their preparations with a professional eye. Occasionally, she offered a suggestion, a slight adjustment to Thompson's communications gear, a recommendation for Wilson about the explosive charges he was preparing. Maxwell remained somewhat distant, his earlier skepticism not entirely dispelled. As the team's weapons specialist, he took particular pride in his expertise and seemed reluctant to accept input from an outsider, regardless of her experience. Your charging handle is sticking slightly, Hayes noted as she passed Maxwell, inspecting his M4A1 carbine. He looked up with a frown. I just had this weapon service last week. The humidity in the armory affects the buffer spring tension. 3 drops of CLP on the charging rail should resolve it. She continued past without waiting for acknowledgement. Maxwell tested the charging handle, noting the slight resistance. Reluctantly, he applied the lubricant as suggested. The mechanism immediately operated more smoothly. His expression registered surprise, followed by grudging respect. As evening approached, Sullivan gathered the team for a final briefing. The atmosphere had shifted from professional detachment to the focused intensity that preceded high-risk operations. Gentlemen, I don't need to emphasize the importance of what we're about to undertake. Sullivan's voice carried the gravity of command. If we succeed, no one outside this room will ever know. If we fail, the same is true. We operate in the shadows because that's where threats like Blackwood thrive. He looked at each man in turn. Some of you have served with me for years. Some are facing your first black operation. All of you were chosen because you represent the finest qualities of our naval special warfare community. I have complete confidence in your abilities. Sullivan gestured to Hayes, who stood slightly apart from the group. Ms. Hayes brings a unique perspective and skill set to this mission. Her knowledge of the target and the adversary is unparalleled. You will extend to her the same respect and immediate compliance you would to me. Hayes stepped forward. The MH-60 Blackhawk will depart at 2330 hours. We'll maintain communication silence throughout the flight. The halo insertion occurs at precisely 0200 hours. Our window for landing undetected is extremely narrow. She activated a small projector showing terrain imagery. We'll touch down here in this clearing 3 miles northeast of the facility. From there, we move on foot, maintaining noise and thermal discipline. Angel Fortress has perimeter sensors designed to detect conventional approach vectors. What about indigenous wildlife? Thompson asked. Won't their movement trigger the same sensors? The system is calibrated to distinguish human movement patterns from animals, Hayes explained. We'll need to modify our approach accordingly. I've mapped specific routes that minimize our signature by following game trails and natural terrain features. Once we reach the facility, Jackson inquired. Hayes highlighted the ventilation access point on the projection. I'll lead entry through this maintenance jet. It's a tight fit 30 inches in diameter with multiple 90-degree turns. Rodriguez and Wilson will accompany me for the initial breach. The rest of you will secure our extraction route and provide overwatch. She turned to Sullivan. Colonel, I recommend you coordinate from the perimeter position. Your expertise and overall mission command will be most valuable there. Sullivan understood what she wasn't saying aloud. At 64, the tight confines of the ventilation shaft would be challenging. He nodded his agreement. Once inside, Hayes continued, we'll have approximately 40 minutes before the next automated security sweep. During that window, we need to locate the Thanatos technology, secure it for transport, and prepare our exit strategy. In Blackwood, Maxwell asked. Hayes' expression remained neutral, but her eyes hardened. If we encounter Blackwood, I will handle him personally. The briefing concluded and the team dispersed for final preparations and a few hours of rest before deployment. Hayes remained behind studying the facility schematics with intense concentration. She had spent 3 years tracking Blackwood after learning of his involvement in her father's death. Now finally she had the opportunity to bring him to justice. Sullivan approached quietly. You should rest. The mission will demand everything we have. I'll rest when it's done. She didn't look up from the schematics. Every time I've come close to Blackwood in the past, he's been one step ahead. I can't allow that to happen again. Sullivan sat beside her. This isn't just about the mission for you, is it? It's about closure. Hayes finally looked at him. My father died trying to expose a corrupt system that valued deniability over accountability. Blackwood was the weapon that system used. And now he's stolen technology that would make such deniable operations even more lethal and undetectable. She closed the schematics. So yes, it's personal, but that won't compromise the mission. I believe you. Sullivan paused. You know Bill would be proud of what you've become. A flash of emotion crossed Hayes' face before she controlled it. You can't know that. I can. I served under him for 2 years. He spoke of you often, that brilliant daughter who could outshoot him by the time she was 10. Sullivan smiled at the memory. He saw greatness in you even then. Hayes stood abruptly. We deploy in 4 hours. You should brief your team on emergency protocols in case we're separated during the operation. She walked away, her posture rigid, unwilling to continue the personal conversation. Sullivan watched her go, understanding more than she realized. The burden of carrying secrets for decades created a particular kind of isolation. He had seen it before in the eyes of operators who had performed missions that would never appear in any record. At precisely 2330 hours, the team assembled on the tarmac. The modified MH-60 Blackhawk waited, its engines already warming, rotors turning lazily. The helicopter had been stripped of all identifying markings and equipped with experimental noise reduction technology that muffled its acoustic signature by 70%. Hayes arrived last, carrying her rifle case in a compact tactical pack. She had changed into unmarked black tactical gear that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No insignia, no patches, nothing that could identify her affiliation if the mission went wrong. Final equipment check, Sullivan ordered. The team conducted their inspection with practiced efficiency. Each man carried an HK-416 carbine with suppressor, a Sig Sauer P226 sidearm, 4 fragmentation grenades, 2 smoke grenades, night vision goggles, encrypted communication devices, and mission-specific equipment based on their specialization. Hayes carried her customized sniper rifle, a suppressed Glock 19, and what appeared to be a specialized electronic device secured to her tactical vest. Comms check, Thompson said, distributing the encrypted earpieces. Each team member confirmed communications functionality with a simple acknowledgement. Their voices would be transmitted via subvocal microphones that picked up throat vibrations rather than audible speech, allowing communication in complete silence. "Mount up," Sullivan ordered. The team boarded the helicopter in predetermined order. Hayes took the seat nearest the door, her expression unreadable, as she stared into the darkness beyond the tarmac. Whatever doubts or emotions she might be feeling remained hidden behind a mask of professional detachment. As the Black Hawk lifted off, banking sharply to the north and accelerating to cruise speed, Sullivan found himself studying the woman who had appeared so unexpectedly in their lives. Morgan Hayes, daughter of a legendary SEAL trained by a program so classified even he had only heard whispers of its existence. A ghost among ghosts operating in the darkest corners of American covert operations for over 20 years. And now she was leading them into Angel Fortress to confront the man who had betrayed her, killed her father, and threatened national security with stolen technology that could reshape the balance of global power. The Black Hawk thundered through the night, carrying 7 individuals whose mission would never appear in any official record. If they succeeded, the world would never know how close it had come to a new era of undetectable assassination technology. If they failed, that new era would begin with their deaths. The countdown to infiltration had begun. The MH-60 Blackhawk sliced through the night sky, its modified engines emitting little more than a whisper compared to standard military helicopters. Inside the darkened cabin, the team sat in contemplative silence, each man mentally preparing for the mission ahead. The red glow of the cabin lights cast their faces in crimson shadow, highlighting the determined set of their jaws and the focused intensity in their eyes. Morgan Hayes sat nearest the door, her customized M40A6 sniper rifle secured across her lap. Her eyes remained fixed on the darkness beyond the helicopter, but her mind was calculating variables, contingencies, approaches, and extractions. 22 years of black operations had taught her that preparation often meant the difference between success and unmarked graves. 20 minutes to drop zone, the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. Hayes looked across the cabin at Colonel Sullivan. Even in the dim light, she could see the iron resolve in the older man's expression. Sullivan had been operating in shadows almost as long as she had, though his missions at least appeared in classified records. Her own operations existed only in the memories of those who had authorized them and the nightmares of those who had survived them. "Final gear check," Sullivan ordered, his voice cutting through the engine noise. Each team member methodically verified their equipment one last time. Rodriguez double-checked his specialized electronic warfare devices, compact tools that could bypass even the most sophisticated security systems. Thompson tested his communications gear, ensuring each encrypted channel functioned perfectly. Wilson secured the specialized breaching charges designed for minimal sonic signature. Jackson verified his infiltration tools, custom lockpicks, and electronic bypass modules that could overcome most security barriers. Maxwell performed a final check on his HK-416, the weapon and extension of his body after years of combat operations. Hayes watched them with quiet approval. Sullivan had chosen his team well. Each man represented the pinnacle of special operations training with skill sets that complemented one another perfectly. If any team could infiltrate Angel Fortress and extract the Thanatos technology, it was this one. "Halo procedures confirmed," the pilot announced. "Approaching drop zone in 15 minutes. Current altitude 30,000 feet. Ground temperature at target 43 degrees Fahrenheit, winds from the northwest at 7 knots. Hayes activated her tactical wrist display, reviewing the topographical information of their landing zone one final time. The small clearing in the Blue Ridge Mountains was barely large enough for 7 operators to land safely, surrounded by dense pine forests that would conceal their approach to the fortress. "Listen up," Sullivan said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Once we're on the ground, we maintain strict noise and thermal discipline. Angel Fortress was designed to detect conventional military approaches. Hayes will take point, followed by Rodriguez, Wilson, Thompson, Jackson, Maxwell, and myself. Maintain 10-meter spacing and follow Hayes' exact route." Questions? No one spoke. The mission had been thoroughly briefed, each aspect covered in meticulous detail. Now it was simply a matter of execution. 10 minutes to drop, the pilot updated. "Cabin depressurizing now." The subtle change in air pressure signaled the beginning of the operation's most dangerous phase. Halo jumps, high altitude, low opening, were inherently risky even for experienced parachutists. Jumping from 30,000 feet required oxygen systems and exposed the team to extreme cold, and the risk of hypoxia if equipment malfunctioned. Hayes stood first, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this maneuver countless times. She secured her oxygen mask and signaled for the others to do the same. One by one, the team members connected their oxygen supplies and performed buddy checks, verifying that each person's equipment was properly secured. The helicopter's side door slid open, revealing the vast darkness beyond. 30,000 feet below lay the moonlit landscape of Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains, a tapestry of dark forest and silver ribbons of rivers. The bitter cold of high altitude instantly filled the cabin, the temperature dropping to near zero. Hayes moved to the door, checking her altimeter and GPS coordinates. She looked back at Sullivan, who gave her a single nod. This was it, the point of no return. With fluid grace, she stepped into the void. The initial shock of free fall always produced the same reaction, a momentary sense of absolute freedom, followed by intense focus. Hayes counted in her head as she plummeted through the darkness, monitoring her wrist altimeter as the numbers decreased rapidly. The team followed in precise 5-second intervals, maintaining their spacing to prevent mid-air collisions during freefall. The sensation of falling from 30,000 feet was unlike anything else, an experience of both absolute solitude and perfect clarity. The wind screamed past Hayes' oxygen mask as she reached terminal velocity, approaching 120 miles per hour. She adjusted her body position using subtle movements to control her descent path, guiding herself toward the small clearing that served as their landing zone. At 6,000 feet, Hayes checked her altimeter again. Almost time. She scanned the sky around her, confirming the positions of her teammates. All 6 were in formation, maintaining proper spacing and trajectory. At 4,000 feet, she pulled her ripcord. The specialized stealth parachute deployed with minimal noise, the black canopy barely visible against the night sky. The sudden deceleration jerked her upward as the parachute caught air. Around her, 6 other canopies blossomed in the darkness, each operator controlling their descent toward the tiny clearing below. Hayes guided her parachute with precision, adjusting for the slight crosswind as she approached the landing zone. The ground rushed up to meet her. She bent her knees, preparing for impact, and touched down with practiced efficiency, immediately collapsing her parachute to prevent being dragged by errant wind. Within 90 seconds, all 7 operators had landed within the clearing, their parachutes quickly gathered and buried beneath the forest floor. Nothing could be left that might indicate their presence. Hayes removed her oxygen system and jump harness, securing her tactical gear and weapon. She activated her night vision goggles, transforming the darkness into shades of green. The forest around them came alive with detail, pine trees swaying gently in the night breeze, small animals scurrying through underbrush, the uneven terrain of the mountain slope leading toward their target. Sullivan approached his movement nearly silent despite his age and the challenging terrain. "Status," he whispered. "All equipment functional," Hayes replied softly. "Angel Fortress lies 3 miles southeast. We follow the game trail to avoid triggering seismic sensors." Sullivan nodded and signaled the team to form up. Hayes took point, leading them into the dense forest. They moved like shadows, each footstep carefully placed to minimize sound and disturbance of the environment. Years of training had taught them to flow through the wilderness rather than force their way through it. The night vision equipment revealed the landscape in eerie detail, transforming the forest into an alien terrain of luminous green shadows. Hayes navigated with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the area, following nearly invisible game trails that wound through the trees, avoiding areas where fallen branches might snap underfoot. An hour into their approach, Hayes raised her fist, a silent command to halt. The team froze instantly, becoming as motionless as the trees around them. Hayes crouched lower, her eyes scanning the forest ahead. Sullivan moved forward to join her, his movement completely soundless. "Patrol," Hayes whispered, barely audible, even to Sullivan beside her. 2 o'clock, 100 meters. Sullivan followed her gaze. Through the night vision, he could just make out 2 figures moving through the trees ahead. Armed men in tactical gear carrying what appeared to be modified M4 carbines with thermal imaging scopes. "They shouldn't be this far out," Hayes continued, her voice tight with concern. "Perimeter patrols were limited to 500 meters from the facility in my previous intelligence." Sullivan processed this new information quickly. "Blackwood's expanded the security perimeter. He's expecting us." "Or someone," Hayes agreed. "The patrol route suggests they're searching more than securing. Blackwood knows something's coming, but not exactly where or when." She studied the patrol's movement for another moment. We need to adjust our approach. The eastern ravine should still be clear if they're maintaining standard patrol distribution. Sullivan nodded and relayed the change to the team through hand signals. They would need to detour nearly a half-mile, adding precious time to their approach, but attempting to slip past the patrol carried too much risk. The team reversed direction, following Hayes through an even denser section of forest. The terrain grew increasingly challenging, steep slopes, loose rocks, tangled underbrush. Yet they maintained their silence and spacing, adapting to the environment with the unconscious skill of elite operators. Hayes led them down into a narrow ravine, a natural feature that channeled rainwater down the mountain during storms. Now dry, it offered a concealed approach that avoided the open terrain where patrols would most likely operate. The ravine deepened as they progressed, the walls rising to nearly 20 feet on either side. Hayes moved cautiously, aware that while the ravine provided cover, it also created a potential trap if discovered. The team maintained absolute silence, communicating only through hand signals when necessary. After 40 minutes of careful progress, Hayes halted again, raising her hand. Ahead, the ravine opened onto a small plateau. Beyond that, barely visible through the trees, stood their target, Angel Fortress. The facility was largely built into the mountainside, its true size concealed by careful engineering and natural camouflage. From their position, only the main entrance was visible, a reinforced concrete structure resembling a bunker more than a building, with narrow windows designed for defense rather than aesthetics. Multiple security cameras swept the surrounding area, their movement barely perceptible in the darkness. Infrared sensors mounted on poles created an invisible detection grid around the perimeter. Hayes signaled for the team to hold position while she conducted a reconnaissance. She moved forward alone, becoming nearly invisible as she slipped from shadow to shadow, using the natural terrain for concealment. Her movement was so fluid, so perfectly matched to the environment, that even the trained operators watching her occasionally lost sight of her position. She returned 10 minutes later, moving directly to Sullivan's position. 4 guards at the main entrance, 2 more on roving patrol. Security systems appear unchanged from my previous intelligence, but they've added motion sensors in the tree line disguised as rock formations. Sullivan nodded. The ventilation access, still viable. It's on the northeastern face, concealed behind a false rock formation, but the approach is exposed for approximately 20 meters. Hayes consulted her wrist display. We have a window in 17 minutes when the surveillance cameras cycle through their diagnostic reset. Sullivan turned to the team. Rodriguez-Wilson, you're with Hayes for the initial breach. Thompson maintained communications relay from this position. Jackson-Maxwell, you'll secure our emergency extraction route through the service road on the western perimeter. The team acknowledged their assignments with silent nods. Hayes checked her equipment one final time, ensuring every piece of gear was secure and silent. The specialized electronic device on her tactical vest emitted a soft blue glow. As she activated it, a signal dampener designed to create a 6-foot radius of electronic invisibility by absorbing electromagnetic emissions. 15 minutes, she said quietly. Once we're inside, maintain radio silence unless absolutely necessary. The fortress has RF detection equipment that might pick up transmissions even on our encrypted frequencies. The team separated into their assigned groups. Hayes led Rodriguez and Wilson toward the northeastern face of the facility, using the limited cover available to approach the ventilation access point. Sullivan remained with Thompson, establishing the communications relay that would serve as their link to the outside world if the mission required emergency extraction. Hayes, Rodriguez, and Wilson reached the tree line bordering the exposed approach to the ventilation shaft. Hayes checked her watch. 7 minutes until the camera reset. She surveyed the open ground between their position and the target one last time, identifying each security measure and planning their exact path. When we move fast, she whispered. The motion sensors have a 3-second processing delay between detection and alarm. If we cross the entire space within that window, we might avoid triggering them. Rodriguez and Wilson nodded, their faces masks of concentration. Both men had conducted similar high-risk infiltrations before, but never against a facility designed specifically to prevent exactly what they were attempting. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Hayes kept her eyes on the security cameras, watching their movement patterns, waiting for the brief flash that would indicate the beginning of their diagnostic cycle. On my mark, she breathed, tension evident even in her controlled voice. 3, 2, 1. The cameras froze momentarily, their indicator lights blinking from solid red to flashing yellow. The diagnostic cycle had begun. Now, Hayes burst from cover, sprinting across the open ground with Rodriguez and Wilson close behind. Their movement was rapid but precisely controlled, each footstep placed with deliberate care despite their speed. 20 meters of exposed terrain stretched before them, each step potentially triggering alarms that would bring the entire security force down on their position. They reached the rock formation, concealing the ventilation access with seconds to spare. Hayes immediately began working on the access panel, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she entered a complex bypass sequence into the keypad hidden behind a false stone. The ventilation cover slid open silently, revealing a dark tunnel barely large enough for a person to crawl through. Hayes entered first, followed by Rodriguez and Wilson. The cover slid closed behind them, sealing them inside Angel Fortress with no immediate way out. The ventilation shaft was claustrophobically narrow, its metal walls cold to the touch as they crawled forward in absolute darkness. Hayes led the way, navigating from memory, counting the turns and junctions that would lead them to their first objective, the security control room on level 2. After 15 minutes of uncomfortable crawling, Hayes reached a grate overlooking a dimly lit corridor. She peered through the slats, confirming the hallway was empty, then carefully removed the grate and lowered herself into the corridor. Rodriguez and Wilson followed their movements silent, despite the awkward exit from the confined space. Hayes activated her tactical display, bringing up the fortress schematic. Security control is 30 meters east, then 2 levels down. Wilson set charges at these junction points. She indicated several locations on the schematic. If we need emergency extraction, those will create enough chaos to cover our exit. Wilson nodded and moved to the first location, removing specialized shaped charges from his pack. The explosives were designed for maximum structural impact with minimal explosive signature, an important consideration when operating in a facility built into a mountain. Hayes and Rodriguez continued toward the security control room, moving with the careful precision of predators in hostile territory. Each corner was approached with caution, each open space crossed with awareness of potential observation. The fortress seemed unusually quiet, no security personnel visible in the corridors, no technicians moving between stations. "It's too quiet," Rodriguez whispered. "Where is everyone?" Hayes frowned slightly. Blackwood must have consolidated his forces somewhere else in the facility. Maybe the vault level where the Thanatos technology would be stored. They reached the stairwell leading down to the security control room. Hayes paused, listening intently, then proceeded downward. Each step was placed with careful consideration, avoiding the center of the stairs where metal fatigue might create noise. The security control room door featured a biometric lock requiring palm print and retinal scan. Hayes extracted a small device from her tactical vest and placed it against the scanner. The device cycled through stored biometric data, attempting to fool the system into granting access. After 30 tense seconds, the lock flashed green and the door slid open. Hayes entered first, her sidearm raised, scanning for threats. The room was empty. Multiple monitors displayed feeds from throughout the fortress, showing corridors, laboratories, and exterior approaches. 3 computer terminals controlled the facility's comprehensive security systems, from motion sensors to automated defense protocols. Rodriguez immediately moved to the central terminal, connecting his specialized hacking equipment to bypass the encryption. "Give me 3 minutes to access the main system." Hayes studied the security feeds, noting the positions of Blackwood's security team. Most appeared to be concentrated around a large vault door on level 4, exactly where she had predicted the Thanatos technology would be stored. 8 guards visible on the security feeds, she noted. All ex-military, based on their positioning and patrol discipline. Rodriguez worked rapidly, his fingers flying across his equipment as he penetrated the fortress's security architecture. "I'm in. Accessing camera controls now. Loop the feeds for corridors 7 through 12 on level 3. That'll give us a clear path to the main elevator shaft." Hayes continued monitoring the other cameras, watching for any indication their presence had been detected. A flicker of movement on one monitor caught her attention. She leaned closer, studying the image with narrowed eyes. The camera showed a large command center on level 4 adjacent to the secure vault. A tall figure stood at a central table, leaning over what appeared to be facility schematics. Thomas Blackwood. Even through the grainy security feed, Hayes recognized him instantly. The distinctive scar on his face, the confident posture, the way he gestured to his subordinates, all painfully familiar from years of partnership before his betrayal. "Wilson, report," she sub-vocalized into her communications device. "Charges set at junction points Alpha and Bravo," came the quiet response. "Moving to Charlie now." Hayes turned back to Rodriguez. "How long until you can access the vault-level security?" "The encryption is more complex than expected," he replied, frustration evident in his voice. "They've implemented a rotating cipher that changes every 60 seconds. I need more time." Hayes made a quick decision. "Keep working. I'm going to create a diversion on level 2. That should draw some of the security personnel away from the vault level." Before Rodriguez could protest, she was moving toward the door, her mind already formulating a plan. The armory on level 2 would make an ideal diversion target, destructive enough to demand a security response, but not so catastrophic as to threaten the facility's structural integrity. She slipped into the corridor, moving with silent efficiency toward the stairwell that would take her back to level 2. The fortress remained eerily quiet, increasing her sense that something wasn't right. Blackwood was too experienced, too paranoid, to leave sections of the facility this lightly guarded unless he wanted them to penetrate this far. Hayes reached level 2 and navigated through the maze-like corridors toward the armory. She encountered no resistance, no patrols, not even automated security measures beyond the standard cameras, which she carefully avoided. The armory door featured another biometric lock, which she bypassed using the same method as before. The door slid open to reveal rows of weapons, rifles, submachine guns, explosives, and tactical gear. Enough firepower to equip a small army. Hayes quickly planted 3 small incendiary devices among the stored ammunition, setting timers for 5 minutes. The resulting explosion would be contained by the armory's reinforced walls, but would create enough chaos to draw security personnel away from the vault level. As she finished setting the last device, a soft click behind her froze her in place, the unmistakable sound of a weapon being ready to fire. "I must say I'm disappointed, Morgan." The voice was smooth-cultured, with the faintest trace of an accent that had never been fully eliminated despite years of training. "Breaking into my home through the same ventilation shaft you used last time, I expected more creativity from you." Hayes turned slowly, her hands carefully visible, to face the man she had hunted for 3 years. Thomas Blackwood stood in the doorway, a custom tactical pistol aimed steadily at her chest. He looked older than in her memories, the scar more pronounced, but his eyes remained the same cold, calculating blue that had once watched her back through dozens of operations. "Hello, Thomas," she said calmly. "You're looking well for a traitor and a murderer." Blackwood smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Still holding grudges, I see. That was always your weakness. You never could separate the personal from the professional. Was it professional when you sold out our team in Iraq? When you left 5 good operators to die while you collected your blood money?" Hayes kept her voice steady, her mind racing through potential responses, calculating odds and angles. "It was business," Blackwood replied with a small shrug. "Just like this is business. The Thanatos technology is worth billions to the right buyers. Enough to retire very comfortably, which is more than our government ever offered for our services." Hayes took a careful step to her left, adjusting her position slightly. "Is that what you told yourself when you killed William Hayes? That it was just business?" Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or the faintest trace of regret. "You know about that?" "I know everything, Thomas. Every operation, every assassination disguised as an accident, every piece of evidence my father collected before you put a bullet in his head." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Your father was naive. He believed in principles, in rules of engagement, in the fantasy that our government's hands could remain clean while maintaining global dominance. He never understood the reality of power. He understood the difference between serving his country and betraying it." Hayes replied, her voice cold with controlled fury. "Something you never learned. And yet here you are, still doing their dirty work, still following orders, still believing you're one of the good guys." Blackwood gestured with his free hand. "How many people have you killed, Morgan? How many operations have you conducted that would horrify the American public if they knew? We're not so different, you and I. I just decided to profit from my skills rather than squander them in service to ungrateful masters." Hayes watched him carefully, noting the subtle tells in his posture and expression. Despite his apparent confidence, Blackwood was tense alert. He knew she was dangerous, even unarmed. Where's the Thanatos technology, Thomas? What are you really planning to do with it? In approximately 7 hours, representatives from various interested parties will arrive for a demonstration and auction. Blackwood replied, the opening bid starts at $1 billion. Given the capabilities of the system, I expect that figure to at least triple by the end of negotiations. Hayes took another subtle step, positioning herself between Blackwood and the incendiary devices she had planted. You know I can't let that happen. Which is precisely why you're going to die in this room, Blackwood said, his voice almost regretful. I respected your skills, Morgan. In another life we might have continued as the effective partnership we once were. We were never partners, Hayes replied coldly. I was just too blind to see what you really were. Blackwood sighed. A pity. Goodbye, Morgan. His finger tightened on the trigger, but Hayes was already moving. She dropped and rolled as the shot cracked above her, the bullet embedding itself in the wall where she had stood. Her hand grabbed a smoke grenade from a nearby shelf, triggering it and sending thick white smoke billowing through the armory. Blackwood fired twice more, the shots going wide as Hayes weaved through the smoke, using the weapon racks as cover. She reached for a sidearm on one of the shelves, but Blackwood anticipated her movement, firing again and forcing her to change direction. You're outmatched this time, Blackwood called through the smoke. I have the entire facility locked down. Your team is already being hunted. No one's coming to save you. Hayes didn't respond, conserving her breath as she maneuvered through the smoke-filled room. Blackwood was right about one thing: this wasn't a fight she could win with brute force. But then that had never been her approach. A shadow moved in the smoke to her left. Hayes reacted instantly, dropping low as Blackwood fired again, the bullet passing through the space where her head had been a split second earlier. She surged forward, driving her shoulder into his midsection with calculated force. Blackwood staggered backward, momentarily off balance but recovering quickly. He attempted to bring his weapon to bear, but Hayes was inside his guard now, her movements a blur as she struck his wrist with precision, sending the pistol clattering across the floor. Like old times in the training room, Blackwood said with a cold smile, shifting his stance to a familiar combat position. Shall we see if the student has finally surpassed the teacher? They circled each other in the thinning smoke, two predators assessing strengths and weaknesses. Both had been trained in the same lethal techniques, both knew exactly how to kill with bare hands, and both understood the other's capabilities all too well. Blackwood struck first, a lightning-fast combination aimed at vulnerable points: throat, solar plexus, knee. Hayes deflected each blow with practiced precision, her muscle memory responding to attacks she had defended against hundreds of times during their years training together. She countered with a sweep toward his ankles, forcing Blackwood to adjust his stance, then followed with a strike toward his throat that he barely blocked. The impact sent shockwaves up her arm, a reminder that despite his age, Blackwood remained formidably strong. You've improved, he acknowledged, a hint of genuine approval in his voice. But you still telegraph your intentions. You always did. And you still talk too much, Hayes replied, launching another attack, this one a feint followed by a driving knee toward his midsection. Blackwood blocked the knee but missed the elbow that followed, catching him across the temple. He staggered slightly, blood trickling from a small cut above his eye. The momentary advantage was all Hayes needed. She pressed forward, a flurry of strikes, forcing Blackwood on the defensive. Her movements flowed with practiced grace, each attack connecting to the next in a seamless sequence that gave her opponent no time to recover his balance. A powerful strike to Blackwood's sternum drove him backward into a weapons rack, sending rifles clattering to the floor. Hayes followed through, pinning him against the rack with her forearm across his throat. It's over, Thomas, she said, breathing heavily from the exertion. Tell me how to access the vault. Where's the Thanatos technology? Blackwood smiled through the pressure on his throat. Do you really think I came alone, Morgan? The door to the armory slid open, revealing two armed mercenaries, their weapons trained on Hayes. She maintained her position, keeping Blackwood pinned, calculating her options. Release him, one of the mercenaries ordered, his accent Eastern European, possibly Russian. Now, Hayes knew she was out of options. Even she couldn't neutralize two armed opponents from this position, not without getting killed in the process. Slowly, she released pressure on Blackwood's throat and stepped back, hands raised. Blackwood straightened his tactical gear, the smile never leaving his face. Predictable as always. Your sentimentality makes you weak. You could have used the moment to break my neck, trading your life for mine. But you're still hoping to complete your mission to save the day. That's not how our world works, Morgan. It never has been. Sir, the second mercenary said urgently, checking a handheld device. We have intruders on level 4. Security systems have been compromised. Blackwood's expression darkened. It seems your team is more resourceful than I anticipated. He turned to Hayes. Perhaps you'll get to witness the effectiveness of the Thanatos technology firsthand. I had hoped to save the demonstration for the buyers, but your colleagues will make adequate test subjects. He nodded to the mercenaries. Secure her. Bring her to the command center on level 4. I want her to watch what happens to people who interfere in my business. As the mercenaries moved to restrain her, Hayes's gaze fell on the timer of her incendiary devices. 30 seconds remaining. Not enough time to escape, but enough time to create chaos. The mercenaries seized her arms, securing them behind her back with reinforced zip ties. Blackwood retrieved his pistol from the floor, checking it before holstering it at his side. I truly am sorry it came to this, Morgan, he said, sounding almost sincere. We could have accomplished remarkable things together. We still have unfinished business, Thomas, Hayes replied quietly. This isn't over. Blackwood studied her face for a moment, perhaps recognizing something in her expression. His eyes widened slightly. Check her for devices. Now. But his realization came too late. The timer reached zero and the incendiary devices ignited simultaneously. The resulting explosion was contained as Hayes had planned, but the sudden flash and concussive force threw the mercenaries off balance. Hayes dropped to the floor as ammunition began cooking off in the intense heat, sending bullets ricocheting around the armory. Blackwood dove for cover behind a steel cabinet, shouting orders that were lost in the chaos of secondary explosions. In the confusion, Hayes rolled behind a concrete support pillar, maneuvering her bound hands to reach the hidden blade in her boot. As bullets whizzed overhead and smoke once again filled the room, she cut through the zip ties, freeing her hands. Her tactical training took over immediate action drills, practiced thousands of times until they became instinct. She crawled through the smoke toward the nearest weapons rack, securing a sidearm and spare magazines. The heat from the burning ammunition was intense, the smoke threatening to overwhelm her, despite her specialized training for such environments. Through the chaos, Hayes could hear Blackwood organizing his forces, directing them to secure the exits. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they regained control of the situation. Not enough time to neutralize Blackwood, but enough to escape and rejoin her team. She activated her communications device. All units be advised, cover blown. Blackwood knows we're here. Proceed to phase 2 immediately. Sullivan's voice crackled through the earpiece. Copy that. Thompson and I are proceeding to the rendezvous point. Maxwell and Jackson report hostiles on the western perimeter. Rodriguez's status, Hayes called as she maneuvered toward the secondary exit of the armory. Level 4 security bypassed, came the tense reply. Wilson and I are approaching the vault. Heavy resistance expected. Hayes made a split-second decision. Negative. Fall back to extraction, point Charlie. We regroup and reassess. But the technology, Rodriguez began. That's an order, Hayes cut him off. Blackwood has the facility locked down and knows our positions. We need to regroup. She could hear movement beyond the smoke-filled armory, mercenaries positioning themselves to sweep the room once the fires died down. Her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The secondary exit was a maintenance access panel designed for ventilation system repairs. Hayes pried it open with a knife from her tactical vest, revealing another narrow shaft similar to their original entry point. She slipped inside just as the armory door slid open and Blackwood's men entered in tactical formation, weapons at the ready. As she crawled through the claustrophobic space, Hayes could hear Blackwood's voice echoing through the facility's PA system. Attention all security personnel. We have multiple intruders in the facility. Shoot to kill. Repeat, shoot to kill. The mission had entered its most dangerous phase. Discovered, outgunned, and separated, the team now faced the full force of Blackwood's security apparatus. And somewhere in the depths of Angel Fortress, the Thanatos technology waited a weapon that could shift the balance of global power if it fell into the wrong hands. Hayes moved faster through the ventilation system, her determination hardening into resolve. The encounter with Blackwood had confirmed what she had suspected for years. This wasn't just about national security or preventing a dangerous technology from reaching the market. This was personal. It always had been. The ventilation system of Angel Fortress formed a labyrinthine network of metal shafts, some barely wide enough for a person to navigate. Hayes crawled through the cramped space, her movements precise despite the confined quarters. Years of training had taught her to control her breathing, to manage the natural human response to claustrophobia. The cold metal pressed against her shoulders as she advanced, using her elbows and knees to propel herself forward. Through her earpiece came fragmented communications, some clear, others broken by the fortress's thick concrete walls and electronic countermeasures. Position compromised, moving to secondary. Wilson's voice cut in and out. Hostiles on level 3. Rodriguez pinned down. Thompson's transmission was clearer but equally concerning. Hayes reached a junction in the ventilation system, pausing to consult the mental map she had memorized years ago during her previous infiltration. To her right lay the path to level 3, where Rodriguez was reportedly under fire. To her left, a route that would eventually lead to the extraction point, where Sullivan would be organizing their emergency departure. The mission parameters demanded she prioritize extraction. The Thanatos technology was important, but not at the cost of the entire team. Yet something held her in place. Blackwood's words echoed in her mind. I want her to watch what happens to people who interfere in my business. He intended to use the Thanatos technology against her team. If she abandoned Rodriguez and Wilson now, they might become the first American casualties of the weapon they had come to secure. Decision made. Hayes turned right, moving toward level 3 with renewed urgency. The ventilation shaft narrowed further, forcing her to compress her body into an uncomfortable position as she navigated a vertical section. The physical strain was immense, muscles burning with effort, but her focus remained absolute. She reached a grate overlooking a corridor on level 3. Through the slats, she could see signs of recent conflict, spent shell casings on the floor, bullet holes in the walls, and the unmistakable smear of blood leading away from the area. But no bodies, no indication of who had been injured or how seriously. Hayes carefully removed the grate and lowered herself into the corridor, her sidearm ready. The facility's emergency lighting bathed everything in a red glow, casting ominous shadows across the walls. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear shouted commands and the occasional burst of gunfire. Rodriguez, report position, she sub-vocalized into her communications device. Static answered her for several seconds before a strained voice broke through. Server room, level 3, section C. Pinned down by 3 hostiles. Wilson wounded. Hayes oriented herself quickly. Section C lay approximately 80 meters east of her current position, through 2 security checkpoints that would almost certainly be guarded. Direct approach would be suicide. She moved to a nearby maintenance panel, quickly bypassing the electronic lock to access the facility's internal systems diagram. Angel Fortress had been designed with redundant power and communications infrastructure, a feature that now provided an alternative route to her teammates. The maintenance tunnels running beneath the main corridors were cramped and seldom used, but they offered a path that avoided the main security checkpoints. Hayes descended through a narrow access hatch, dropping into a tunnel barely tall enough to stand in. The air was stale thick with the smell of machine oil and dust. She moved rapidly through the dimly lit passage, counting junction markers to navigate the underground maze. Ahead, a metal ladder led upward toward what should be the floor of the server room, where Rodriguez and Wilson were trapped. Hayes paused at the base of the ladder, listening intently. Above her, muffled by the access panel, came the sound of voices speaking in clipped professional tones, the unmistakable cadence of military operators coordinating an assault. Target location confirmed. Preparation for gas deployment. 5 minutes until breach. They were preparing to flood the server room with some kind of incapacitating agent, likely followed by a tactical entry to capture or eliminate Rodriguez and Wilson. Hayes had minutes at most to intervene. She ascended the ladder, silently reaching the sealed access panel at the top. Unlike the other maintenance panels throughout the facility, this one could not be opened from within the tunnel, a security measure to prevent exactly the kind of infiltration she was attempting. Hayes removed a specialized breaching charge from her tactical vest. The device was barely larger than a credit card, but contained enough concentrated explosive to breach the reinforced panel without creating a dangerous pressure wave in the confined space. She placed it carefully along the panel's seam, set the timer for 15 seconds, then descended several rungs to shield herself from the blast. The charge detonated with a muffled thump, more vibration than sound. Hayes ascended immediately, pushing through the damaged panel into the space beyond. She found herself beneath a raised floor designed to accommodate the extensive cabling required by the server room's equipment. The voices were clearer now, coming from just outside the server room's reinforced door. Hayes navigated through the narrow space beneath the floor tiles, moving toward the heat signatures she detected with her tactical goggles. Ahead, a floor tile had been removed. Rodriguez must have identified the same access point and used it as a defensive position. Hayes reached the opening and whispered urgently, "Rodriguez Wilson, status report." A face appeared at the opening, tight with tension and smeared with blood. Rodriguez looked exhausted but operational. "Hayes, thank God." Wilson took a round through the shoulder. "I've stabilized him, but he's lost a lot of blood." "How many hostiles?" Hayes asked, already planning their extraction. "At least 5 outside the main door. They've been trying to breach for the past 15 minutes. Blast door is holding, but they're bringing in something bigger now." Rodriguez glanced over his shoulder toward where Wilson presumably lay. "We accessed the vault data before they found us. The Thanatos technology, it's worse than we thought." "Explain," Hayes prompted, continuing to scan their surroundings for threats. Rodriguez leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. "It's not just assassination tech. The AI system is designed to infiltrate secure networks, override safety protocols, access nuclear launch systems. Hayes, this thing could start World War III if properly deployed." The information landed like a physical blow. Hayes had suspected the technology's capabilities extended beyond what they had initially been briefed, but this revelation elevated the stakes considerably. They couldn't allow Blackwood to auction this system to hostile powers or terrorist organizations. "We need to move," Hayes said decisively. "Help me with Wilson." Rodriguez nodded and disappeared from view. Moments later, he returned with Wilson, who looked alarmingly pale, his tactical gear darkened with blood around a hastily applied field dressing. Despite his injury, Wilson remained conscious, his jaw set with determination. "I can move," he said through gritted teeth, anticipating Hayes' concern. Hayes helped them navigate the tight space beneath the raised floor, moving away from the server room's main entrance, where Blackwood's forces were preparing to breach. They had perhaps 2 minutes before the assault team realized their quarry had escaped. They reached the maintenance tunnel access point, and Hayes helped Wilson descend first, followed by Rodriguez. The wounded demolitions expert moved with impressive stoicism, despite what must have been excruciating pain. "Thompson Sullivan update," Hayes vocalized into her communications device as they moved through the maintenance tunnel. Sullivan's voice came through clearly, his tone tense but controlled. "Holding position at extraction point, Charlie. Maxwell and Jackson have engaged hostiles on the western perimeter. Thompson is maintaining communications relay." "Rodriguez and Wilson are with me," Hayes reported. "Wilson is wounded but mobile. Be advised, the Thanatos technology poses an even greater threat than initially assessed. Strategic priority is now destruction rather than extraction." A brief pause followed before Sullivan responded. "Understood. How do you propose we destroy something we can't access?" Hayes had been considering this problem since learning the true nature of the technology. Angel Fortress has a self-destruct protocol designed to prevent sensitive data from falling into enemy hands. If we can access the central command center, we can activate it remotely. "And Blackwood?" Sullivan asked the question, carrying deeper meaning than the words themselves. "He'll be in the command center," Hayes replied, her voice hardening. "I'll handle him." They reached a junction in the maintenance tunnel, and Hayes paused to consult her mental map once more. The quickest route to the command center would take them through heavily guarded areas. An alternative path existed, but it would require navigating a section of the fortress that had been damaged in a previous structural incident, possibly unstable, definitely dangerous. "We need to reach level 4, Hayes said, pointing toward a narrow passage branching off to their right. "That tunnel will take us to the emergency stairwell in Section F. It's rarely used because of structural damage from a foundation shift 3 years ago." "Is it stable?" Rodriguez asked, supporting Wilson, as the injured man leaned against the tunnel wall. "Stable enough," Hayes replied, not entirely confident, but seeing no better alternative. "It's our best chance to avoid Blackwood's security forces." And they proceeded through the cramped passage, the ceiling gradually lowering until they were forced to crouch then crawl. Wilson's breathing became increasingly labored, the exertion clearly taking its toll on his wounded body. The tunnel ended at a maintenance access panel similar to the one they had breached earlier. Hayes pressed her ear against the metal, listening for any indication of movement beyond. Hearing nothing, she carefully opened the panel and emerged into what appeared to be a storage room filled with decommissioned equipment. Dust covered everything, suggesting the room hadn't been used in years. The concrete walls showed obvious signs of structural stress, long cracks running from floor to ceiling, places where the foundation had shifted enough to warp metal shelving units. Hayes helped Wilson and Rodriguez out of the tunnel, then secured the room's only door. A quick check of Wilson's wound revealed that the field dressing was soaked through, his condition deteriorating despite his stoic silence. "I need to rebandage this," Hayes said, already reaching for the medical supplies in her tactical vest. Wilson shook his head. "No time, the mission comes first. I can hold on." Hayes ignored his protest, efficiently replacing the blood-soaked bandage with a fresh one containing hemostatic agents to slow the bleeding. "The mission includes getting everyone out alive, Sergeant. I don't leave people behind." Something flickered in Wilson's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or grudging respect. He nodded once in acknowledgement. Hayes activated her tactical display, reviewing the fortress schematic one more time. "The emergency stairwell should be directly across the hall from this storage room. It will take us up to level 4. The command center is approximately 70 meters from the stairwell exit. And Blackwood will have it heavily guarded," Rodriguez added grimly. "Almost certainly," Hayes agreed. "But he's also arrogant. He believes he has us on the defensive, scattered and disorganized. He won't expect a direct approach to his command center." She checked her sidearm, ensuring a round was chambered and the magazine full. "Rodriguez, can you still access the facility's systems remotely?" He nodded, patting a device secured to his tactical vest. "Limited access, but enough to create some distractions." "Good. I need you to trigger alarms in sections A and B when we're ready to move. That should draw some of his forces away from the command center." Hayes contacted Sullivan, once more updating him on their position and plan. "Once we reach the command center, I'll need approximately 3 minutes to activate the self-destruct protocol. After that, we'll have 15 minutes to reach extraction point Charlie." "Understood," Sullivan replied. "Maxwell and Jackson are returning to our position now. We'll be ready for emergency extraction when you give the word." Hayes turned to Rodriguez and Wilson. "Ready," both men nodded. Wilson summoning his remaining strength to stand unassisted, though the effort clearly cost him. "Trigger the alarms," Hayes ordered. Rodriguez activated his device, and seconds later the facility's alarm system blared to life in distant sections of the fortress. Through the storage room's door, they could hear running footsteps as security personnel responded to the perceived threat. Hayes opened the door a crack, confirming the hallway was momentarily clear, then led her team across to the emergency stairwell. The door was secured with an electronic lock, which Rodriguez quickly bypassed. The stairwell revealed the structural damage Hayes had mentioned. Concrete crumbling in places, metal supports exposed, and rusting entire sections of stairs, missing where the foundation had shifted most dramatically. It would be challenging for a healthy operator to navigate, let alone someone with Wilson's injuries. "I'll go first," Hayes said, testing the nearest section of stairs for stability. "Rodriguez, stay close to Wilson. If anything feels unstable, stop immediately." She began the ascent, moving carefully across damaged sections, testing each step before committing her weight. Behind her, Rodriguez helped Wilson navigate the treacherous path, the wounded man's determination evident in his refusal to show pain, despite the obvious agony each movement caused. They reached the 4th-level landing, the door marked with faded lettering, identifying it as access to command-level authorized personnel only. Hayes pressed her ear against the door, listening intently for any sound from beyond. "2 guards approximately 5 meters from the door," she whispered. "Standard patrol pattern, 15-second intervals." Hayes removed a small fiber optic camera from her tactical vest, sliding the nearly invisible wire beneath the door to provide a visual of the corridor beyond. The display confirmed her assessment: 2 armed guards patrolling a short section of hallway leading to what must be the command center. "I'll neutralize them," Hayes said, drawing her suppressed sidearm. "Once the corridor is clear, move quickly to the command center entrance. Rodriguez, you'll need to bypass the security on that door. It's likely using a different protocol than the standard facility systems." Rodriguez nodded, readying his electronic bypass equipment. Hayes counted the patrol timing, waiting until both guards had just turned away from the door. She opened it just enough to provide a firing angle, her weapon extended. 2 suppressed shots precisely placed the guards collapsed without raising an alarm, their bodies hitting the floor with muted thuds. She opened the door fully quickly, dragging the fallen guards into the stairwell to conceal them from casual observation. Rodriguez helped Wilson into the corridor, supporting most of his weight as the injured man struggled to remain conscious. The command center entrance loomed ahead, an imposing blast door designed to withstand significant explosives. Rodriguez immediately set to work on the security panel, his fingers moving with practiced precision despite the pressure. "This is military-grade encryption," he muttered, connecting various bypass devices to the control panel. "Multi-layered authentication protocols. I need time." "Time is something we don't have," Hayes replied, scanning the corridor for any sign they had been detected. "How long?" "3 minutes, maybe 4. Rodriguez didn't look up from his work, concentration evident in his furrowed brow. Hayes made a quick decision. "Wilson, stay with Rodriguez. Keep pressure on that wound." She removed her sidearm and handed it to the injured operator. "If anyone comes through that stairwell who isn't wearing our team identifier, shoot them." Wilson accepted the weapon with a grim nod, positioning himself with his back against the wall to conserve strength while maintaining a clear line of fire toward the stairwell. Hayes moved to one of the corridor's ventilation grates, quickly removing it to reveal another access to the facility's extensive air circulation system. "There's a maintenance access directly into the command center through the ventilation system. I can bypass the blast door and open it from inside." "That's a hell of a risk," Rodriguez said, glancing up from his work. "If Blackwood is in there—" "He is," Hayes replied with certainty. "And it's time we finish this." Without waiting for further discussion, she slipped into the ventilation shaft, navigating the narrow space with practiced efficiency. The path to the command center was seared into her memory from both mission briefings and her previous infiltration. Every turn, every junction, every potential obstacle had been cataloged and analyzed. She reached the grate overlooking the command center and paused, surveying the room below. The large chamber was dominated by a central command table surrounded by monitors displaying various sections of the facility. Several technicians worked at computer stations along the walls, monitoring security feeds and system diagnostics. And there, standing at the command table reviewing what appeared to be security protocols, was Thomas Blackwood. He looked frustrated, issuing rapid commands to his personnel, clearly disturbed by the alarms still blaring in distant sections of the fortress. His right arm was bandaged just above the elbows, evidence that her earlier encounter with him had not left him unscathed. Hayes studied the room's layout, identifying the access panel for the blast door controls and the master systems terminal where the self-destruct protocol could be activated. Both were currently staffed by armed technicians, making direct access challenging. She would have one chance to act before the room erupted into chaos. Speed and precision would determine success or failure. Hayes removed the ventilation grate with painstaking care, ensuring it made no sound that might alert those below. She extracted a flashbang grenade from her tactical vest, removed the pin, and held it ready. One deep breath. Focus. Execute. She dropped the grenade into the center of the room and shielded her eyes. The subsequent explosion of sound and light sent the room's occupants reeling, temporary blindness and disorientation affecting everyone below. Hayes dropped from the ventilation shaft, landing in a controlled crouch. She moved immediately toward the nearest armed technician, neutralizing him with a precise strike to the base of the skull before he could recover from the flashbang's effects. Blackwood recovered faster than his personnel, his training evident in the way he oriented himself despite temporary blindness, drawing his sidearm and firing in Hayes' general direction. The shots went wide but forced her to adjust her approach, diving behind a computer console for cover. "Morgan!" Blackwood shouted, his voice carrying over the chaos as the room's occupants stumbled and groped blindly for weapons. Always the dramatic entrance. Some things never change. Hayes moved silently from her position, circling toward the blast door controls. The technician there was still disoriented, clutching his eyes and cursing. She neutralized him with a quick strike and accessed the control panel, entering the emergency override sequence to unlock the blast door from inside. "I can hear you moving, Morgan." Blackwood called, his vision clearly beginning to return as he tracked her movement more accurately. "Always favoring your left side when you think you're being stealthy. I taught you better than that." The blast door began to slide open, revealing Rodriguez and Wilson on the other side. Rodriguez immediately moved to help Wilson into the command center, positioning him behind cover as Blackwood's security personnel began to recover from the initial disorientation. Hayes activated her communications device. Command center secured. Beginning self-destruct sequence. All units proceed to extraction point Charlie. 15-minute countdown commences on my mark. She moved toward the master systems terminal, neutralizing another guard who lunged for her with desperate ferocity. The terminal required biometric authentication, handprint, retinal scan, and voice confirmation. Hayes had prepared for this, carrying the necessary bypass equipment to simulate the required biometric data. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Blackwood said, his voice suddenly calm despite the chaos around him. He had positioned himself across the command table, his weapon trained on her with steady precision. "The self-destruct sequence will bury this entire facility along with the Thanatos technology. Is that really what your masters want? To lose access to the most significant intelligence breakthrough of the decade?" Hayes continued working on the terminal of bypassing security protocols with methodical efficiency. "Some technologies are too dangerous to exist, Thomas. You know that better than most." "Is that what this is really about?" Blackwood asked, taking a careful step to improve his firing angle. "Destroying dangerous technology? Or is it about revenge for your father?" Hayes paused fractionally, the mention of her father momentarily breaking her concentration. It was enough of an opening for Blackwood. He fired twice the bullets, striking the terminal, inches from her hands, sending sparks and shattered components flying. "You always did have a blind spot when it came to family," Blackwood said, advancing slowly. "It makes you predictable, exploitable." Rodriguez fired from his position, forcing Blackwood back behind cover. "Hayes, we need to move. Security teams will be converging on this position." Hayes assessed the damaged terminal. The primary interface was destroyed, but a secondary access point existed beneath the main console. She dropped to her knees, accessing the emergency protocols hardwired into the facility's construction. "Morgan, listen to me," Blackwood called from behind his cover. "The people who sent you here, the same people who employed your father, they're not the heroes in this story. They created Thanatos. They designed it specifically to avoid accountability, to eliminate threats without evidence or oversight." Hayes connected bypass circuits to the secondary terminal, rerouting power to the emergency systems. "And you thought selling it to terrorists and hostile governments was the better option?" "I thought exposing it was the better option," Blackwood replied, surprising her. "The auction is a facade. The real purpose was to force the government to acknowledge the program's existence, to create a paper trail that couldn't be erased." The self-destruct interface illuminated, requesting final authorization. Hayes hesitated, Blackwood's words creating an unexpected moment of doubt. "He's lying," Rodriguez shouted. "Don't listen to him." Hayes made her decision. She entered the final authorization code. The facility's automated system announced in a mechanical voice, "Self-destruct protocol activated. 15 minutes to complete evacuation. All personnel proceed to emergency exits immediately." Blackwood emerged from cover, his expression a mixture of anger and what might have been regret. "You've just ensured that the truth dies with this facility, exactly as they wanted." Hayes stood to face him. "No, Thomas. I ensured that a weapon that could kill thousands of innocent people never reaches the open market." "And what about justice for your father?" Blackwood asked, his weapon still trained on her. "What about exposing the people who ordered his death? The same people who sent you here?" "That was never the mission," Hayes replied, though uncertainty flickered briefly in her eyes. "The mission," Blackwood said with sudden bitterness. "Always the loyal soldier following orders without question. Your father questioned. That's why they eliminated him. That's why they sent you to eliminate me. We know too much." A distant explosion shook the facility, dust falling from the ceiling as the foundation trembled. The self-destruct sequence had begun, starting with the lower levels. "We need to move," Rodriguez urged, supporting Wilson, who had grown alarmingly pale. "Now." Hayes maintained eye contact with Blackwood, their weapons still trained on each other in perfect stalemate. "Come with us," she said, suddenly surprising even herself. "Face justice for what you've done. Tell your side of the story to a federal prosecutor." Blackwood laughed, though the sound held no humor. "Justice in a system controlled by the same people who ordered the creation of assassination technology that leaves no evidence. We both know what would happen to me in federal custody." Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered momentarily before emergency systems engaged. 13 minutes to complete evacuation," the automated voice announced. "Go." Blackwood said, lowering his weapon slightly. Get your team out. I have my own extraction plan. Hayes hesitated, torn between the mission parameters that demanded Blackwood's neutralization and the growing suspicion that he might be telling the truth about why he had stolen the Thanatos technology. Hayes, Rodriguez shouted with renewed urgency, Wilson's fading. We need to move now. The decision was made for her as a section of ceiling collapsed between her position and Blackwood's, filling the air with concrete dust and twisted metal. When visibility cleared, Blackwood was gone, a side entrance to the command center standing open where he had made his escape. Hayes ran to Rodriguez and Wilson, helping support the injured man as they moved toward the exit. Sullivan, we're proceeding to extraction point. Charlie, self-destruct protocol engaged, 13 minutes remaining. Copy that, Sullivan replied, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his tone. Maxwell and Jackson have secured the extraction road. Be advised, we're detecting increased seismic activity throughout the mountain. The facility may be destabilizing faster than anticipated. They made their way through corridors now filled with panicked personnel, Blackwood's mercenaries and technicians rushing toward emergency exits with no concern for the intruders in their midst. The facility's imminent destruction had rendered other priorities meaningless. Hayes led them toward a service elevator that would provide the fastest route to their extraction point, bypassing the damaged stairwells they had used for access. Wilson's condition continued to deteriorate, his weight increasingly supported by Hayes and Rodriguez as consciousness began to slip away. Stay with us, Wilson, Hayes urged as they entered the elevator. That's an order, Sergeant. The injured man managed a weak nod, fighting to maintain consciousness through sheer force of will. The elevator descended rapidly, carrying them toward their extraction point on level 1. Another explosion rocked the facility, this one powerful enough to momentarily halt the elevator's descent. Emergency lighting engaged as the main power fluctuated. 9 minutes to complete evacuation, the automated voice announced, now accompanied by blaring alarms throughout all levels. The elevator resumed its descent, reaching level 1 with a jarring halt. Hayes forced the doors open, revealing a corridor partially blocked by fallen debris. They navigated around it, moving as quickly as Wilson's condition would allow toward the extraction point, where Sullivan and the rest of the team waited. They rounded a final corner to find Sullivan, Thompson, Maxwell, and Jackson in defensive positions around an emergency exit leading to the mountainside. Sullivan's expression showed visible relief at their appearance, quickly replaced by concern when he saw Wilson's condition. Medevac standing by at the rally point, Sullivan reported as Maxwell moved to take over, supporting Wilson. We need to move fast. This whole mountain feels like it's coming apart. Hayes nodded, helping transfer Wilson to Maxwell's care. Rodriguez has the data on Thanatos. Everything else will be destroyed with the facility. In Blackwood, Sullivan asked, his tone making it clear he understood the mission parameters regarding the rogue operative. Unknown, Hayes replied, avoiding a direct acknowledgement of her failure to neutralize him. Last seen in the command center before structural collapse separated us. Sullivan studied her face for a moment, perhaps recognizing there was more to the story, but operational necessity overrode curiosity. Let's move. 5 minutes until this place becomes a tomb. The team proceeded through the emergency exit, emerging onto a narrow service road carved into the mountainside. The night air felt shockingly cool after the dust-filled corridors of the fortress, a momentary relief quickly overshadowed by the urgency of their situation. They moved rapidly along the service road, supporting Wilson between them as they raced against the facility's imminent destruction. Behind them, sequential explosions continued to work through Angel Fortress, each one more powerful than the last, as critical systems detonated in precisely engineered sequence. 3 minutes to complete evacuation. The automated voice echoed from the fortress entrance, barely audible now, over the rumbling of the mountain itself. They reached a clearing where a black helicopter waited, rotors already spinning in preparation for immediate departure. The pilot wore no identifying marks, his features obscured by a flight helmet with darkened visor, a ghost aircraft for a ghost operation. Maxwell and Jackson loaded Wilson into the helicopter first, where a medical specialist immediately began treating his wounds. Thompson followed with Rodriguez, the latter clutching the data device containing everything they had managed to extract about the Thanatos technology. A massive explosion shook the mountain, far larger than the previous detonations. Hayes looked back to see the main entrance of Angel Fortress collapse in on itself, massive concrete slabs falling, as the supporting structure failed catastrophically. That's the primary ammunition storage, she shouted over the helicopter's rotor wash. We're out of time. Sullivan boarded the helicopter, turning to offer Hayes a hand up. She reached for it just as the ground beneath them heaved violently, a fissure opening in the clearing as the mountain's structural integrity failed. The helicopter began to lift off, the pilot recognizing the imminent danger. Sullivan lunged further out, still reaching for Hayes as the gap between them widened. "Jump!" he shouted, straining to maintain his position while Maxwell held his tactical vest from behind. Hayes backed up several steps, gauging the rapidly increasing distance. The helicopter hovered 15 feet off the ground, now the gap beneath it growing as the clearing continued to fracture. It was a nearly impossible jump, but the alternative was certain death as the mountain collapsed. She sprinted forward, gathering all her remaining strength for one final effort. At the edge of the widening chasm, she leaped, her body arcing through the air towards Sullivan's outstretched hand. Their fingers brushed, almost connecting before gravity reasserted its inevitable dominance. Hayes began to fall, the gap now too wide, the helicopter too high. Sullivan's anguished expression was the last thing she saw before a section of the mountain broke away, carrying her into darkness as Angel Fortress imploded, taking its secrets, its technology, and Morgan Hayes with it. 3 months later, Colonel James Sullivan stood alone in his office at Naval Special Warfare Command, watching a thunderstorm roll in from the Atlantic. His retirement ceremony had been held that morning, a small private affair, attended only by those who knew the true nature of his final mission. On his desk lay the after-action report, appropriately sanitized for official records. The mission to neutralize Thomas Blackwood and secure or destroy the Thanatos technology was listed as partially successful. The technology had been destroyed, but Blackwood's body had never been recovered, presumed dead in the destruction of Angel Fortress, but without confirmation. No mention was made of Morgan Hayes, no acknowledgement of her sacrifice, no recognition of her 22 years of service to a country that would never officially admit she had existed. Sullivan picked up a small object from his desk, a battered challenge coin bearing the insignia of SEAL Team 2. It had belonged to William Hayes, passed down to his daughter, and recovered from the helicopter, where she had placed it for safekeeping before their final approach to Angel Fortress. A soft electronic tone drew Sullivan's attention to his secure computer terminal. A message had arrived at sender field, empty, its encryption beyond anything his security clearance should permit. Sullivan sat down, slowly opening the message with a growing sense of disbelief. "The ghost still walks. The mission continues. Truth lies beneath the shadows." No signature, no identification. But Sullivan knew only one person with both the capability to bypass his computer's security and the reason to send such a cryptic message. He looked once more at the thunderstorm, a smile slowly forming on his weathered face. Out there, somewhere beyond the reach of official records and government oversight, Morgan Hayes was still fighting her private war for justice, still hunting the shadows that had claimed her father's life and nearly taken her own. The ghost still walked, and her mission was far from over.